o'clock news and politics hour. We've got Jennifer Lawless. Everything is going on down in D.C. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good, good. So have to pick your brain with what transpired earlier today before we even go to the president's comments from yesterday. Kind of the big news today was Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer saying, you know what, we're not going to go to the White House. They had issues with the tweet that President Trump had put out regarding immigration and sort of Democrats in general. Posturing, or is this the most divisive politics we've seen in a while?
It's pretty divisive, but frankly, I don't blame Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer because the president made it clear that he wasn't seriously into cutting a deal or negotiating or having a real conversation that could result in a bipartisan endpoint. The other thing is, remember that although Schumer and Pelosi said that they were not going to meet at the White House, they did say that they were going to reach out to Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell to see if there would be a way for Democrats and Republicans to come together outside of the Trump framework where it seems more hostile. So, I don't think that they've written off the possibility of bipartisanship or compromise. I think they have decided that they're not going to sort of be pawns in this strange chess game that the president seems to be playing.
And do you think tensions were already heightened? I mean, they have been for weeks and months now between the parties. But after yesterday and the comments that the president had made regarding Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, is it just another week down in D.C.?
I think that what's a little bit different about the Pocahontas comments is that it was offensive on so many levels, right? It would have been offensive enough if the event took place merely in front of the portrait of Jackson, right? That would have been offensive. It would have been offensive enough if the president had simply said that Elizabeth Warren is who they refer to as Pocahontas. But then beyond that, you have Sarah Sanders standing and speaking on behalf of the White House saying that they don't think of Pocahontas or the president's remarks as in any way being a racial slur. So once again, he doubled down, and maybe this is a way to motivate his base or to remind them that he's the same Trump that he's always been, but it was just incredibly in poor form and offensive.
But are we not surprised to see this reaction from the White House after the fact, as we had seen in months past from a Sean Spicer as well? Again, that sort of Monday morning quarterbacking, justifying does that make it even worse in the eyes of people who think it was an issue?
I think so, but I think we're getting to the point where it's really only Democrats who think it's an issue. The Republicans seem to continue to give Donald Trump a free pass and explain away a lot of his behavior, or at least suggest that this is just the way that Donald Trump speaks. He doesn't have this bias or this discrimination or this hatred or this racism in his heart. And frankly, it doesn't matter. It's still offensive. But, there's a tax bill that's trying to get passed, and the Republicans have to be cautious in terms of how much they embrace or distance themselves from the president.
And have we seen comments from top Republicans since the Pocahontas comments? I've seen some sort of rhetoric online, basically giving, again, as you said, the president that hall pass. Because as we've known, the Republicans have taken issue for a long time with Elizabeth Warren and her claim to ties to Native American lineage. As you said, it's a dance. It's a very fine line that Republicans need to take right now.
It is. I haven't seen any high-profile Republicans say that what the president said was inappropriate. And what's really interesting here is the Republican line on all of this seems to be about Elizabeth Warren and whether she may have misled people as to her background, which, by the way, she claims she did not do, and she still stands by the statements that she made. But putting that aside, there's also this broader issue, which is that the Republicans don't seem willing to address the fact that what he said was offensive to the people in the room at the event that he was speaking at in particular, right? Instead, they're trying to make this about partisan politics. And as a result, they're kind of launching Elizabeth Warren into the national spotlight once again. And, she's a figure that the Democrats really like to rally behind and that can energize a populist base.
And again, as we look to the president, we look to things that he has said and done before. You got to wonder, is he cognizant when he says these things, right? Is it a little misstep on his part, or does he know this will send the media world into a frenzy for at least 24 to 48 hours and, again, provide those distraction politics?
I don't know. I mean, if that's what he's doing, then there's a lot of risk for what so far seems to have been relatively little reward, because it's not like sending the media into a frenzy then frees up time for him to negotiate important deals or generate legislative outcomes on the Hill. That's not what's happening. The other thing I would say here that I think really matters is that more and more analysts, more and more former elected officials, more and more former appointed officials, including those in the FBI and the CIA, are now having very serious conversations about whether Donald Trump has deluded himself into believing the things that he says, right? If you repeat the same thing over and over and over again, at some point, there are people out there who begin to believe that it's true. And I think that's a very scary place for us to be. Yesterday, when he said, for example, that, the Access Hollywood tapes might not be authentic. And, Maggie Haberman at the New York Times has at least 3 people who have said that he has said that to them very seriously. It's hard to imagine how the president can say that and not actually believe it, because it is so far from reality that it's not a lie, it's a delusion.
Because he did admit, he did apologize, did he not, when those Access Hollywood, when those remarks came out over a year ago? He acknowledged and admitted, yes?
He acknowledged and admitted. Melania Trump spoke about it. Billy Bush was fired about it. Nobody at that time ever questioned the authenticity of the tape. If there was any question as to the authenticity of the tape, I would assume that Billy Bush would have been a little bit more, he might have fought a little bit harder when his contract with NBC ended. And it's the one thing actually that Donald Trump did apologize for. So the fact that he's now backing off from that apology is even more striking.
So let's tack back to the Hill now that they're back in after the Thanksgiving holiday. Again, still a lot of eyes and attention being paid to the sexual harassment claims there. Let's start with Al Franken. Again, there were kind of calls before the holidays that there might be an ethics investigation. Where does he stand now?
I think there will be an ethics investigation. We also know that Nancy Pelosi and the House Ethics Committee will launch an investigation into John Conyers, who stepped down as head of the Judiciary Committee in the House. More important than these individual investigations is a bipartisan effort that started last week and is continuing into this week to generate real policy change for how sexual harassment allegations are filed, handled, and dealt with in the United States Congress, where it seems that in industries across the country, everybody else seems to have gotten on board with the fact that it's not okay to treat women this way. The U.S. Congress has been pretty lackadaisical in how they've dealt with this. And so Barbara Comstock, a Republican, and Jackie Speer, a Democrat, have banded together with several other members and are putting forward some real change. So I think that the broader holistic changes to the sexual harassment policies are probably ultimately going to be more important than what happens to Al Franken or John Conyers.
So we're keeping an eye there, but clearly keeping an eye on December 12th. Can we talk a little bit about this Washington Post expose regarding the woman who had claimed to have allegations regarding Roy Moore and then exposing her for basically being a plant? Can we talk about what the reaction inside the Beltway to this was?
It's insane. The Washington Post, by the way, I think is now regarded, it was always well regarded, but it's now regarded as sort of so far and above pretty much any other outlet, especially when it comes to snuffing out what's true and what's not true in the Trump administration. But this was sort of beyond the pale, right? The fact that this woman was then trying to bash the Post for not adequately reporting on her allegations when they couldn't confirm the allegations, right? So what they were doing was actually what you would want the media and you would want journalists to do. And, now that she's claiming, she's sort of using the fact that they didn't report on the fact that she was lying as a defense of saying that the media are, too left-wing is just completely insane. The other thing I would mention here, though, is that as insane as some of these tactics have been, it's very, very possible, and if I had to guess today, I would say probable, that Roy Moore is going to win this seat. And that's kind of unbelievable given the allegations.
I have to say, being in the media world, a lot of times we're given tips. You've got to check things out. You're not going to do things unless you have the utmost certainty that a source who is giving you information is true. The fact that the Post turned around, videotaped her when the journalist was confronting her about all these inconsistencies, the GoFundMe page, which basically said that she wanted to go work as a plant, if you will. They saw her going into the offices as well. Sets a new precedent. We talk about fake news all of the time. Did the Washington Post really elevate it and say, look, we're working here just like everybody else is, and we can we can and we will turn the tables.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's really interesting about this case is that they turned the tables because they said that she did not approach them in good faith. So they had to walk a very fine line because they want people to feel like they can bring them stories. They want people to feel comfortable reporting and substantiating claims. But by the same token, they also wanted to make it clear that the confidentiality and the anonymity they promise is contingent on presenting that information in good faith, and it's clear that she did not. So, I think it was probably a difficult call for them to make. They knew that they had all of their ducks in a row when they did it, but I can see how this is tricky because you don't want to be in a position where people are reluctant to come to you because they think that you might call them out by name.
Well, again, it does put that pressure on sources to say, look, if you come to us, your story better be true and not something that's fabricated that could in turn paint us in poor light. Did you see the video in its entirety? It was about 9 minutes.
I didn't see the whole thing.
Well, the journalist at the outset was saying, very clear, we're taping this, you are being recorded, again to the source, trying to give her sort of that chance to sort of come clean. And then it was only at the final moment did the Washington Post reporter say, oh, wait, am I being taped? Just from a curiosity standpoint, but again, kind of going through all those checks that a journalist has to go through if you get information to say this person is valid and their story checks out. It was sort of that combination of both the media world and politics, which certainly garnered some interest up here. So let's talk a little bit, we've gone through sort of the big news items down there, but again, with their tax reform, what do you expect that we are going to see?
So it's bad for the Republicans, and it's bad because there are now 3 sets of Republicans that all have competing interests who need those interests to be satisfied in order for them to sign on, and placating any one of those groups means further turning off one of the others. So at my last count, there were roughly 8 or 9 Republicans who were not willing to endorse the plan. Obviously, they can only lose 2, and each of the contingents has more than 2 people in it. So I just don't see it. I just don't see it working out. Now, the irony, of course, would be if Roy Moore gets elected and then he becomes the deciding vote, in which case all of the claims from the Republicans that, we're not going to seat him, we're going to expel him, my sense is that they're going to be far more inclined to embrace him if that actually turns out to be the case.
As you said, wouldn't it be ironic? Anything else to keep an eye on before we catch up with you next week, Jennifer?
Well, obviously, North Korea just launched a missile attack, so we don't know anything yet. But my guess is that over the course of the next few days, that might at least rise to the top of what's newsworthy, and some of these other things might get pushed down a little bit. The other thing to keep in mind, of course, is the Mueller investigation. It's pretty clear that Mike Flynn has flipped and is cooperating with the independent counsel and Robert Mueller. What that means as well is that Don Jr., Jared Kushner, and perhaps even the president are probably very, very nervous right now because you don't flip a high-ranking person unless you can get somebody above them.
Very interesting. All eyes on DC as always. Jennifer Lawless, appreciate your taking the time to Skype in.
See you next week.
Okay, thanks.